Okay, I'm Sarah Rosenthal, and I wanted to introduce our panel. Um, it's Ways Past Ekphrasis, and we're Sarah Rosenthal, Mary Berger, and Christina Vega-Westhoff. Ekphrasis is usually defined as poetry written in response to art, and this panel radically expands the practice, revealing its potential to bring action, activism, self-revelation, and vision into our writing. And between us, Nina, Mary, and I work with poetry, prose, performance, sound, film, visual art, and installation. So we're going to share some of our work and discuss questions such as how working across media alone or in dialogue with other artists' work generates fresh approaches to language and how it changes our approach to creative practice. So we're going to each present for 12 to 15 minutes, and then we'll collectively address some questions. And after that, we'll open it up to any other questions. So in lieu of reading bios aloud, we'll post each presenter's bio in the chat along the way. And then at the end of the session, we'll also provide links to our websites and Instagram pages so folks can stay in touch. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everybody at LCLC. I'm going to talk about a novel I'm working on. It's called The Confusion of Figure and Ground. It's got a protagonist who's an artist who's inherited an apartment in Manhattan from their estranged mother. So instead of using the apartment as a living space, they strip it bare and start building a multi-part installation that's in part about the deep geology of the New York region and the formation of the New York Islands, also about the pre-colonialist history of the indigenous people in New York, and about some landmark events in the colonization and European settlement of New York. So in part, it's a story about grief, the grief of losing a loved one, especially when there's a conflicted and uneasy relationship, also about climate grief and environmental devastation and political grief, and about the uncomfortable paradox that the more our technology advances and allows us to understand our planet, the more we recognize the consequences of our extraction and consumption and commodification, and all the ways these scales of the personal and the collective intersect. So I'll read a few pages from the manuscript and then talk about what sort of ekphrastic dynamic I think there is there. So this is from The Confusion of Figure and Ground. I don't know when it came to me, and it's a first-person narrative in the protagonist's voice. I don't know when it came to me to use the apartment to build a model of the terminal moraine, the line of rubble that marked the farthest reach of the glacier that had covered the city 20,000 years before. The glacier reached as far as the Narrows, the gap between Staten Island and Brooklyn, where the Hudson River mixes with the Atlantic. An ice sheet over 2,000 feet thick pressed down, scraping and carving and pushing a load of rocks and gravel in front of its snout like a dirt mustache. It blocked the Narrows with a rubble dam, cutting off the connection between the Hudson River and the sea. I became an armchair glaciologist, collecting the discipline's peculiar vocabulary, drumlins and eskers, flower and till. I visualized the ice sheet's movements, so massive and slow they would be undetectable to human perception, like the movement of the earth itself. I brought bags of sand and gravel and small stones the size of potatoes up the elevator and into the apartment, load by load in a two-wheeled shopping cart. It was a slow process, but inconspicuous. No one looked twice at another wire cart, part of the daily parade in and out of the building, rattling along with a load of groceries or laundry or cat litter. Once I had everything gathered, I laid the path, a base layer of sand and gravel with rocks scattered on top. The path went through the living room in a curving berm, about 2 feet wide and 6 or 8 inches high, starting on the west side in the hall by the bathroom, then sweeping down the south-facing window, toward the south-facing window and back up toward the kitchen and the front door at the east. The path's arc mimicked the outline of the ice lobe that had flowed down the Hudson Valley and out to Staten Island. After I laid the arc, I took off the door to the closet across from the bathroom and finished the line of rubble in a sloping pile that reached about 3 feet high against the closet's back wall. The closet was a wormhole that could extend my little rubble pile farther west. I wanted my little pile of rocks to be a transmutation of the 3,000 miles of glacial rubble that had spread across North America. A cord tugged my heart deeper into the reaches of time that I could only know by analogy. I was projecting my own life onto a distant scene, but I didn't know where the scene would lead. So I'll stop there with the excerpt and talk about what I think of as oblique or implicit ekphrastic dynamics in the project. So I'm not explicitly referencing the works that I'm going to talk about in my manuscript, but as I think about this, I understand that these are things that are somewhere in the background as I'm writing. So let me share my screen and show you what I'm talking about. I got to go backwards through my slides. There we go. And everyone can see that, I assume. Um, so the first work I want to talk about is Sun Tunnels by Nancy Holt. Nancy Holt was an American, lived from 1938 to 2014. She was part of the earthworks movement that emerged in the US in the 1970s. And Sun Tunnels is a work in the Great Basin Desert in Utah. It was built between 1973 and 1976. It consists of 4 concrete cylinders, like the kind that are used for culverts to channel water under a roadway. Each tunnel is 18 feet long by 9 feet in diameter, so large enough for a person to walk through. And the tunnels are aligned to the paths of the rising and setting sun on the summer and winter solstice, so they're arrayed in kind of an X. There's a pattern of small holes in each tunnel that represents constellations. On 2 tunnels, the constellations are from the northern hemisphere, so at some point they're visible from this location. And on the other 2 tunnels, the constellations are from the southern hemisphere. So the tunnels make a connection between the scale of the human body and the scale of the solar system and the larger cosmos beyond that. They call out our visual connection with the apparent movement of the sun and the stars, and highlight the cyclic pattern of those movements and the reliable repetition that those patterns show us. The constellation from the southern hemisphere also calls attention to the fact that our planet is a sphere. There's a whole other dome of sky that we know about, we believe in, but we'll never see from this particular location. So I think these connections are similar to what I'm working at with my protagonist and the model of the glacier's terminal moraine, which is also about creating connections between the human scale and things that are much larger and farther away. The glacier isn't on the same scale of light years like the sun or the stars, but the glacier was millions of tons of ice covering millions of square miles of the continent tens of thousands of years ago. And my protagonist is trying to shrink those scales to the size of a room in the apartment as a way of exploring change and loss and also a connection to place on a personal scale and a collective scale. And the next thing I want to talk about is Kurt Schwitter's Märzbau. Schwitters was born in Hanover in 1887. What was then Prussia is now Germany. He died in exile in the UK in 1948. Schwitters was associated with the Dadaists in Germany and Switzerland in the 19 teens and 20s. He's probably best known for his collage style, paper collage style that he developed that he called März, which is named for a text fragment in the first collage that he made, which includes a piece of paper torn from an ad for a commercial bank. In German, the word for commercial or for commerce is Kommerz, so he just had the last syllable of that word. In 1923, Schwitter started building an installation in the apartment he shared with his parents that he called the Märzbau or März building. He transformed several rooms in the apartment into a sculptural environment with sharp angular forms extruding into the living space. He extended the construction through the apartment, including several main rooms and the space, the basement and the attic space. And he worked on the Märzbau until 1937. So from 1923 to 1937, continuing. At that point, the Nazis had already included him in their traveling exhibit of what they called degenerate art, and the Gestapo was demanding an interview with him. So he and his family fled to Norway, leaving behind the Märzbau. A few years later, when the Nazis invaded Norway, his family fled to the UK. The Merzbau was destroyed by an Allied bombing of Hanover in 1943. So there's nothing left of the original work, but we do have photos that were taken in 1933 that capture the Merzbau at one point in time. As I said, he was continually working on it. That was part of the concept of the piece, that it would never be finished. It was a continually evolving concept and piece. Excuse me. So I'm interested in the connection between the Merzbau, the concept of the Merzbau, and what my protagonist is doing in transforming a domestic space into an artwork, blurring the boundaries between the domestic space, the practice of art, and the artwork, and displacing domestic habits with acts of inquiry and estrangement. The third thing I want to talk about is maybe little less obvious, but Yoko Ono's book Grapefruit, that was published in 1964 and later republished. Yoko Ono famously was born in Tokyo, moved to New York in 1952. She was involved with the Fluxus movement in the 60s and 70s, which, like Schwitters and the Dadaists, also blurred the lines between art and everyday life and used performance to engage with the audience and challenge conventional definitions of art. So Grapefruit is a book of instructions for performances. Some are several pages long, some are only a few lines, some are about the body in the landscape or in a domestic space, and blur the distinction between a physical material space and the space of thought or imagination or fantasy. And I'll read a couple of short pieces to give you a taste of it. Light piece. Carry an empty bag. Go to the top of the hill. Pour all the light you can in it. Go home when it is dark. Hang the bag in the middle of your room in place of a light bulb. Room piece. When a room is needed, a, sorry, my screen is blurring that. I'll have to read from my paper. When a room is needed, obtain a person instead of a room. Live on him. When another person is needed, obtain another person instead of another room. Live on them. So I feel like this kind of conceptual act of thought as a performance that merges with the material space around you and alters your experience of that space is one kind of template for the process of inventing a work of art that comes from the imagination of a character who's also an invention. There's no material project at the center of my work. It's only the idea of a character who's also an idea. So I got kind of excited about that loop. Uh, Final thing I want to talk about is the work of a poet and artist named Jennifer Hasegawa, who last year released a book called Naomi Anomi, A Biography of Infinite Desire, published by Omnidon. Jennifer composed the cover image herself using an AI generator. She used words from her poems as prompts and refined the image until she got something she liked. Then she used that image to generate an animation for each poem in the book and put them on Instagram. I've included Jennifer's Instagram handle. I suggest that you check it out. The animations are pretty interesting. I'm interested in this process of using an image generator as a parallel for an act of conjecture and conjuring. Image generation like this is a collaborative act, for better or for worse. You're collaborating with the internet or whatever massive lake of sources the generator is using. You don't know what you're going to get back, but you do get to choose what you keep, and you get to steer it and iterate on it and shape it. Of course, there are many reasons to resist and reject AI as it takes over many parts of our culture. We're all already familiar with that. It invades our privacy. It makes us more dependent on corporate technology. It steals the work of other artists and writers without compensation or even acknowledgement. It eliminates jobs. It can make our social inequities worse. It can make our relationship to the environment worse. But it's something that we need to contend with. And I think playing with it the way that Jennifer did, making it part of her creative project and using it to amplify or project something from her work can be a process of discovery that mirrors and furthers the creative process that we start with independently. So this way of using an AI prompt, I think, is another template for what I'm trying to do with my protagonist, using a similar kind of conjecture and conjuring and iteration as I try to discover what kind of art my protagonist would make in a certain situation? What is at stake for them in the work? What events in their life are influencing it? What is their satisfaction or dissatisfaction with the work? How do other people react to it? Does their work succeed or fail? So, as with an AI prompt, it's the process of stepping into the unknown while having some criteria for what you want from the process. So, I'm thinking about these four artists: Nancy Holt in Sun Tunnels, Kurt Schwitters and Merzbow, Yoko Ono in Grapefruit, and Jennifer Hasakawa and Naomi Anomie. Gives me some points of reference as I'm finding my way with my protagonists. It's a very oblique kind of ekphrasis, not an explicit engagement with these works. But if my protagonist works as a character, I think some oblique ekphrastic references, probably not these, but others, will come through for the reader, which is another iteration of the process. And if you're interested in seeing more of the excerpt that I read from, it's available at this journal, Your Impossible Voice. Here's the URL, but you can also just search for the journal title and you'll come up with it. That's it. Thank you. I will stop sharing. I think you're okay. Yeah.
So thank you so much, Mary. That was really inspiring. Okay, so going to see. Hold on one second. Okay, I think I'm set up. Just need to share my screen. Okay, how's that looking? Good? Okay. Okay, so this talk is called Ekphrasis in Action, Bodies on the Line. And it's going to look at some of my work in prose, poetry, dance, and film, and then extract some ideas and approaches others might benefit from if they're wanting to try working intermediately. So one project I wanted to mention is Estelle Meaning Star. It's a collection of cut up poems. You can think William Burroughs, Dodie Bellamy, Kathleen Fraser, all of them have worked to good effect with this form. It's lineated poetry, but at the same time, it crosses into visual art with the poems revealing traces of the process of making them. So I'll read these two poems from the beginning and the middle of the book. City and ocean, the women are carrying these dying dead things. Any fear they have, they hide, walking along Pacific Rim. Running girls found themselves overlooking the street party, strode up, inserted bodies into conversation, noticed that pacing animal, it's incurred a wound, damaged dog emitting energy. So that's one project, and I'll loop back to it a little bit in a few minutes. But The Grass is Greener When the Sun is Yellow is another project I collaborated on with poet Valerie Whitty, who's based in Oregon. And we were inspired by a chapbook titled Eternal Apprentice, which is a dialogue between two poets that refers at moments to John Cage and Merce Cunningham and their use of chance operations. And we really liked this form of dialogue as book. Our response was, why do we know so much about these artists and not the women choreographers who were inspired by them? So we wanted to learn more about and foreground the work of two of these women, Yvonne Rainer and Simone Forti, while exploring the overlaps between experimental dance and our work as poets. I knew enough to know that there were a lot of overlaps, but I wanted to go deeper, and Val was curious as well. So we started by writing collaborative sonnets, trading lines with each other, sampling language from the chapbook as well as from texts by and about Forti and Rayner. And then we folded in letters that discuss the poems underhand and Rayner and Forti's work, as well as issues on our minds about cultural and political topics and personal details from our lives because we barely knew each other at the time. So we were placing narrative prose, including descriptions of art, which you could consider more of a traditional sense of ekphrasis, interrelation with non-narrative poems that rather than being about Rayner and Forti's work, collaborate with it or even inhabit it. We then went on to write a second book, which just came out recently, One Thing Follows Another, Experiments in Dance, Art, and Life through the lens of Simone Forti and Yvonne Rayner. So this is 10 essays. We each contributed 5, and it digs deeper into the choreographer's work. We wanted to extend the experiment of the previous book by blending scholarship, poetry and poetic language, and memoir addressing our own dance trajectories and blend these in each essay. And we also wanted to see how far we could extend ourselves into dance and how far we could extend dance into the writing. So we used a combination of chants and dance to generate the topic of each essay. And you see here a page from the book that explains how we created a grid with personal memories of dance along the x-axis and themes we located in Rayner and Forti's work on the y-axis. And then using an elaborate procedure, including creating replicas of the grid in our living spaces and dancing on them, we generated random intersections of one memory and one theme for each essay, and then had to figure out how the hell to combine them and write an essay. So we also used a variety of other constraints throughout the book that parallel or are directly inspired by constraints used by Forti and Rayner. For one essay, How Will You Move? Instead of writing about an older memory of dancing, I took a dance class. I wanted to create a real-time memory to write about, and I wanted to bring somatic awareness into the writing. So I was writing both alongside and through contemporary dance. As with Estelle Meaning Star, we also drew on experimental poetry's history of crossing into visual art. The left page that you see here is from my essay, How Will You Move, which I was describing, which is an abecedarian. So there's one section for each letter of the alphabet. And shown here is the section for the letter Z. So it's all zigzaggy. The right page is from Val's essay, Performance at Play, in which she figured out how to translate visual elements from Simone Forti's performance titled Cloths onto the page. So that essay, How Will You Move, led me to step into dance in yet another way, as well as into film. Besides using the abecedarian form, I included choreographic instructions, sometimes straightforward and sometimes poetic, for how to quote unquote dance each letter. And here you see an example of straightforward instructions on the left for the letter R and a poetic example for the letter I on the right. As soon as I came up with the latter constraint, I knew I wanted to bring the essay back across into dance. I wanted to complete the circle. So I'm going to show you the trailer from that film, which uses the language from the letter I that you see on the right here. So give me a thumbs up or thumbs down if it's working or not. To make the letter I, walk a narrow line in inching increments. No need to risk breaking mother's back on top of everything else. Turn tightly on your spot, thinking the whole time, I am a person, I am a very important person, I am a person of no import. Or stick your fingers in your ears and sing la 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 to drown out that noise. What happens when someone approaches? So that experience led to a second film, Lizard Song, based on my poetry collection, Lizard. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to show the trailer today, but it's on my website and I'll share the link later. Both of these films allowed me to enter other forms, including cinematography, in a way far beyond description, while still anchoring in the role of poet. What's happening here? Oops, hold on. No, 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 we're not showing you. Another time. Okay. Um, the last project I'll mention is a recently completed poetry manuscript titled Untitled Poem About a Red Box. So this is lineated poetry, and it uses a very traditional sense of ekphrasis as description, but the art exists only in the imagination of the poetry. I picture inviting visual artists to paint or sculpt their own interpretations of the imagined art and then display those collective images somehow. So, what definition of ekphrasis is this? I don't even know. I'll read just a bit from these opening lines of the poem. This is my very inaugural reading ever of this outside of my writing group. Box, a cardboard box for takeout or like takeout, but made for this occasion. By whom is a question. What occasion? Thin padding, glued or somehow adhered, applied, a made thing. So someone made it is a thought. Over the padding has been added a layer of cloth, red but not any red, ruby or garnet, currant or wine or blood. And it goes on from there. So, synthesizing these experiences, I'd like to extract some ideas that might be useful to others wanting to make intermedia work. The two big questions in the room to me are ask why and decide how. um, in terms of asking why, there is so much to be gained from working within traditional formal boundaries. For example, poems that describe paintings, which, by the by, I also write. So, why take a different approach? For myself, I have a long time desire to challenge formal boundaries, maybe partly as a result of growing up around a lot of abstract art, and partly an anti authoritarian streak that, for all I know, I was born with. In the latter regard, I find this quote by Yvonne Rainer, looking back over decades of work, very liberating. You will ask resistance to what? It almost doesn't matter. Resistance to previously imposed canons of taste, to imperialism, to patriarchy, to social inequity, to war, to abstract expressionism, you name it. However wrong-headed, misguided, naive, ineffectual, enraged, sublimated, a thread is there. But let's be real, intermedia work isn't so radical these days. It has entered the academy. There's a packaging going on that feels at best well-intentioned, somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, possibly dull at times, and at worst commodified. So if we're seeking true innovation, we need to go beyond this new normal. And I think that means paying attention to project-specific motivators and coming up with project-specific ways of entering other media. For example, in making the cut-ups for Estelle Meaning Star, I was doing that after an illness. Physically cutting and pasting letters, words, and lines was a meditation on and a celebration of being alive in a body that was feeling better and could do this work. Also, in this period, I was attending residencies and doing studio visits and just reveling in the hands-on nature of visual artists' work. And the cut-ups led me to inhabit that world in a way I could just barely manage on the skill level while still being planted in language and poetry. So lastly, what decide how? So one thing that I think about is what would kid you do? What would the kid in you do? Children have this impulse to just jump headlong and create. They don't need schooling. They don't need to know the rules. They don't know anything's impossible. And that's a useful thing to tune into. So, whether it's an itch to try out, music or drawing, whether it's a figure drawing class or doodling at the kitchen table, who knows where it might lead, but tuning into your itch. For Val and me, a long-time intrigue with dance led us to explore the work of Forti and Rayner. And as our knowledge and curiosity evolved, so did our courage and capacity to deepen our involvement with dance and seek more vulnerable and robust ways to bring it into our writing. I think another important thing to keep in mind is permission to be bad at it. Releasing ourselves from being good at something is key. When I took the dance class for the essay, How Will You Move? I was fairly awful at parts of the class. And that was fine because I was, next bullet, staying in the service of art. I was saving my ego by reminding myself of my purpose, which was to do research for my essay. And Forti and Rayner and their colleagues were immensely inspiring to Val and me in this regard. They challenged the notion of virtuosity and took the stand that dance can be made by ordinary bodies based on ordinary movements. So lots of permission there. Decide where to draw the line. So now I'm going to contradict what I just said, because when I first decided to make a dance, which became We Agree on the Sun, I thought I'd be one of the dancers. I was going to be my ordinary best self. But at some point, partly because I was in the class that I showed you a photo of, there were professional dancers, and I was starting to enter that world of people who'd been training as dancers since they were frickin' 3 years old. And at some point, I recognized there's a lot to be said for what people with a lifetime of training bring to dance and to such collaborations. So I don't think there's a right way. Either option is a place to draw a line. Show your hand. So consider foregrounding the lack of adeptness in another medium in your work. In One Thing Follows Another, Val writes about experiences and feelings of failure in relation to dance. As a different kind of example, the careful but imperfect cut-ups in A Stell Meaning Star can be seen on one level as enacting themes in the poems about failure to conform and make the grade. Given our professionalized airbrushed world, flubbing up in public and making that part of your art can be a powerful intervention. And lastly, listen to your work. When we share what we're up to creatively with colleagues, they often mention exemplars we might want to study. I do this myself all the time. It's an act of generosity, and it's super supportive. It can also be interesting to simply set those aside for a little while you explore your own relationship to the work underhand and to focus on the needs of the work. And doing so can be really helpful in breaking new ground. You can always figure out when to go back and look at those sources. So, thank you. And I'm going to stop my share. And I am so excited to move on to Christina.
Let's see. Now I get to press lots of buttons. It's connected. Share. And I go here. And I go here. Okay. Can we see this thing that says remediation and as Ekphrasis? Okay, cool. So then I think we're good. Do I need to make this smaller though, maybe? I'll do that for now. Hopefully that won't be a problem. Okay. We're all together now, my child repeated on our first walk with others in the early pandemic. in a place we'd never been, a drive outside of the city we live in so-called Western New York, walking beside streams and down a winding steep path with mud and stones to a creek, given a name in possessive for an occupation, a practice, a method of survival that has perhaps kept the water body among the healthier of water bodies in the region. Chant, poem, and call and response with different of us grown-ups repeating and adding, we are. A collective embodied healing poem. It drew us deeper into relationship and care together and here, there, pointing to healing to be done, questions of access, ongoing need. A way of thanking that we're together in this space now. Thank you to Sarah and Mary. Thank you to the waters and land upon which we find ourselves and those who are putting into practice care of neighbor, of place, plant, water, attention, and unknowing. Louisville and extended community, friends and collaborators. How is ekphrasis recuperative in a time of contaminated, diminished attention? Attention economy, to hold attention longer, remediate consumption, beyond see and document, allow to gestate, get curious, stay and let the body settle or not. Writing of and from art, art as beyond visual and into what one treasures in this lifetime that is life-sustaining for someone, something. A practice of attention, of staying with. Working in embodied and ecologically informed practices in which body, mind, and environment are acknowledged as intimate and interdependent. Thank you to Petra Kuppers for the fabulous Ecosoma. One poetry manuscript I'm working on, written over a decade, Cascade, represents an effort to exist in ethical relationship, to listen and respond, to name and reflect on influence. How am I accountable as viewer, listener, dancer, choreographer? The performances and art named in the titles function as points of departure. Most of the works referenced are produced or performed in the Eastern Great Lakes region on both sides of the so-called Canada-US border. Each poem is an offering of durational performance, an endurance of association. The page is the stage. The poem I'll read from, written after viewing interdisciplinary artist Marie Watt's etching, A Spoon Is, then at the Birchfield Penny Art Center during a break in rehearsals for the site-specific dance, This Grass Is So Close to the Building, held outside the museum, for which I was a collaborator, then helping craft writing and movement and offer feedback to dancer choreographer Nancy Hughes, working mostly with the little trees encased as they were in cement, with 6 little holes for their trunks to grow out of, though they were the kind of trees that would grow much larger than their holes would allow. And we were doing a baby tree dance, a dance about openings and permission and breathing with and our collective memories and challenges around inclusion in the sphere of the museum and otherwise, in the city in connection or isolation, fear or hostility, or a song from childhood, an ancestor who held you tight. I saw the artist Birchfield's tree aura paintings first, then continued through rather quickly. I stopped at the etching with the singular spoon in the center and the words in expansion rippling out from it. A spoon perhaps placed floating, if it were plastic, in a water body or container, or perhaps slowly or quickly sinking, the one spoon, but the dish not visible, implied, or perhaps as plate containing a very thin layer of water from which the ripples poured, emanated, dissected the words and relations of the treaty associationally. I'm living in this land cared for specifically by the Seneca Nation of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Water as life giver, shared resource that should be drinkable for all, land that should be honored, those who hunt, forage, farm, blessed with what they need. I had written already in relation to Marie Watt's work after her exhibit at the Buffalo History Museum, and seen a piece also responding to A Dish with One Spoon, maybe the same etching. Then I was taken with the stitched words, the blankets and quilts, the name shining from the south facade, and its pointed question towards justice. I sat and wrote a poem while in the last days of breastfeeding about that process of bodily separation, water shifting. I later read it aloud in the silos near the Buffalo River, remnants of global industry, trade in transformation. After years of living in the region and co-creating an aerial dance poets theater show about water, There's Nothing So Precious, I wrote this time from the etching with it as a way into my own associations while also deeply inside it as my person. A place of meditation out from perhaps, or circling in, a question of remediating knowledge, relationship. I'm going to read just a poem excerpt from this through Marie Watts' A Spoon Is. Starting around that, do not notice, go to the water, get towards it. And what do you notice yesterday in the wind? The cups became legible through the water leaves. And the one with the binoculars pointed out the eagle, but then couldn't see it, not being acquainted or interested in, at that time, moving one's body, a trunk first in the way, a leaf pattern, still full remediated farmland dump. In the child's dream, the trucks came filled with cement to remake into a city until the animals were less and less and the city more and more. And then the whole world was city and no space for nature. But it wasn't in the end humans' fault. It was the garbage monster they worshipped. And then it wasn't the whole world. At least the intention had been to create a playground in a particular area, but the garbage monster had taken over, and how humans negate responsibility for what is created and denied. And the singular spoon was at the center, the questions and relations that ripple out from it, as if floating through water of words or towards time's heartbeat, until still and sunk, until dredged and piled in the way remediation, often words, works, moving one toxic measure into another spot and calling it clean, clean being a very unbecoming and implicated term in the history and presence of supremacy. One needs the wind, the dry, the sheet on the line. One needs to step into mud and expand the vocabulary. Wetlands expanded. If instead of the lakes, it was the wetlands depicted on the maps of freshwater intake resource, to be protected, nourished, and treasured throughout the ages. Step and hear the foot lift, ooze through. My memory of a quote from Edgar Garcia, or paraphrase, to ingest poison or extract it, as methodology, as applied to the writing of his Skins of Columbus, a dream ethnography, for which he read the diaries of Columbus, slept and recorded his dreams, an alternate log, a log of digestion. Through the colon, as it were, as he wrote. The application of a process in which to reflect, transform, claim agency. Make visible the poisons one encounters and lives through. Decide through becoming unconscious. And Angel Dominguez, writing in Desgraciado, regular imaginative letters to Diego de Landa, who burned the sacred books of the Yucatecan Maya, among other atrocities. To remediate the consciousness, the stories handed down. Eleni Stekopoulos, writing Dreaming in the Fault Zone, a Poetics of Healing, a monumental task. In the video, A Choreography of Remediation, which I'm fortunate to have a dancer here from, working specifically in the area of my child's dream in the poem of garbage monster turned remediated land and nature preserve, asking, how can choreography engage with history and care for land more than human inhabitants, the built environment, and dancers as partners, striving towards reciprocity in complicated entanglement, identity, empire, language? Some tasks held as cohorts in the choreography: to get in love, in relationship, with place, in its and our multiplicity, in context of love, eco-grief, toxins and legacies incalculably embedded, fascism, questions of separation and integration with natural world, which we are too, permission, asking soil, sediment, groundwater, geography as apparatus, translations between dancers, site, aerial. Relieve, heal, alleviate. Collective vibration, never just individual. This is a collage from May rehearsals of that same project. So just kind of reading my attempt at a description, visual description. Upper left to right, railroad outskirts, international commerce and extraction, bird blind number 2, leg torso, leg senses, cattail with rail and power behind, middle left to right, rain willow, we now continue, wetlands with green not drained, cattails and light, arms and light, hands between infinity, trapeze ropes, Dancers like birds rest, find and act as support. Lira, back, floor. Boardwalk, balance frame, rhythms we see juxtapose race through time and extend it, reach from lira to floor run. And then I'm gonna show a video excerpt. So like press pause, see if we get started. And while that's getting ready, just I was starting an in progress description. Haven't gotten very far, but I'll just read that first. Full screen dancer in red runs towards camera, then away, up and down a mound at a nature preserve across the highway from Lake Erie. Once shoreline cattails, these mounds house toxic waste. Bird blinds appear upper left with dancers' mouths, ears, arms alternating in reach. Upper right, rolling down green mound, dancers in red appear. Full screen dancer slows. Okay, and then just flashing the last screen there of cohorts and collaborators. The thank you to Nancy Hughes, Natalie Marino, Angela Lopez, Charlie Fitton, Megan Arnold, Wetlands, their inhabitants and caregivers. And my mentor for this project was Mara Naimanis. And then Roberto Harrison's Saloma, which was part of the music that we heard. An entity to entity intensive communication, poetizing or philosophizing based on the ancient Saloma Panameña practice. That was an entry in counter desecration and became a through line for the project. And then I'll just also thank the Niski and Niska and Avi, who was our amazing videographer. Okay. And that's where I'm gonna stop. Yeah, thank you.
So amazing. Thank you so much, Nina. So we thought we would talk a little bit as a threesome about a question and then see what other people are wanting to address or bring into the conversation or ask. How does that sound to everybody? Okay. So one question that we were interested in, and while we're on thank yous, I want to have some thank yous. I want to say very, very special thanks to the conference organizers, especially Ken Garrett and Matthew Bieberman, the people that I was most in contact with, but I suspect that everybody else on the team is as lovely to work with as they are. And I just really appreciate the way this all went. It was very, very human and kind. Okay, so one question that we were thinking about is well, we were thinking about collaboration, but we were also thinking, somebody asked, I don't know who, is ekphrasis being utilized as a means of speaking deeply into, with Earth, or a city's past or infrastructure or landscape? How might it act as a letter or cross-species otherworldly form of communication? And I see ways that we're all doing that in different ways, and I wonder if we could speak to that. Mary?
You want to take off, Sarah?
I can if you'd like me to, yeah.
You're on mute now.
Quiet.
Yeah. So yeah, I really benefited from thinking about my work through this lens. So in Estelle meaning star, the language is from dream journals I kept while undergoing pretty heavy duty cancer treatment. And, you know, there's nothing like being really sick to thrust you into your animal body and your knowledge of we are animals. And there's that mute suffering animal that we've all seen on the street in, you know, and in our world, right? That we all are, and we're, you know, it's the beauty of animals, the precarity of animals, the suffering of animals was all very much on my mind in making that book. And the image of dying animals comes, and wounded animals comes up a lot in the book. And it's there's this, the first poem that I read is like this. There's this chorus that comes in variations of these women, sort of like a Greek chorus of women who are walking along this edge between the city and the ocean, like between the built environment and wildness. And they're carrying these little broken animals, and they're seeking to give them solace and rest. Um, and then there's also the damaged dog, quote unquote, that came up in the second poem that I read, who seems to shift between an actual dog and a man, a human in desperate circumstances, and a spirit animal. And so, yeah, it was interesting looking at that text through the lens of this question and looking at how it's trying to use the instigator of illness to reconnect and to heal not just the self, but the relationship with other animals and with the earth. Um, and then, so you saw the 1 minute trailer from the film We Agree on the Sun, and that film focuses on homelessness, which is something that I was encountering a lot of as I was coming and going to my dance class. So it kind of pushed its way into my consciousness and into the essay as an important theme. And in the language about homelessness, I'm looking at structural conditions such as urban real estate development and the distribution of wealth and the culture of meritocracy, where everybody is supposedly responsible for whether they make it. Um, and I'm seeing all of that as forming this complex dance that we're all participating in when we walk down the street. and that housed people and unhoused people are doing this weird, complicated dance of, averting the eyes or giving some food or engaging in conversation or not, or complaining to the police or whatever the housed people are doing. It's part of a dance. And so there's this larger abstract structural level, and then there's the dance on the street. And so it's very much about the reality of city life and the extremes of wealth, and I'm arguing that the framing of self is always doomed to failure. And I'm posing an alternative vision of the one sacred body that we're all part of and that we're all responsible for. I have more, but I really want to hear some other voices. So let's get some other folks jumping in here.
I was just gonna say, like, I've been really just kind of tracking and listening today to conjuring, right? I think there's so much conjuring and like jostling, not just jostling the disciplines or like the boundaries of form or present reality if we're out on the street, right? Like an imagination, like that power, and the constellations between kind of what we're tracking and listening to. So I do think of all that as like a love letter to the earth, which we were talking about previously. And I don't know if I have some deep thesis about that, but just to say that I think all these methods are ritual methods, right? Like they're methods of change and transformation, and that it's also like deep transformation of the self and our communities that we're creating. I think these processes just allow us like longer time frames too, or to slow down the time frames, and then see what happens with that. Like so much dedication. It was very amazing to hear both y'all's like different projects. I mean, in the multiplicity that they're in, and the ways of collaboration between thought and art and other humans, and how long, like, right, like how it surprises. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I would start by saying I've always been a little mystified by the traditional definition of ekphrasis or the purpose of it, because I've never been comfortable with even with genre definitions, let alone the strict boundaries between art practices. I'm a visual artist as well as a writer, and everybody here is also practices multiple art forms. And so it it seemed like a perplexing hierarchy to have a piece of writing that responds to a finished piece of art. It seemed like a very sort of static relationship, although I understand there are wonderful examples of it, but it wasn't something that I ever engaged in. But in preparing for this panel, it was exciting to me. The whole process of working on this manuscript has been mystifying to me in a very pleasurable and generative way. I started out not even knowing that my protagonist was an artist, only knowing that they had this apartment that they needed to empty out um, as an act of grief. And anyway, it eventually came that they needed to have this process, and not even clear what the process was about. So in trying to explain this work to myself as it relates to ekphrasis, it's been interesting to kind of try to identify what the subterranean, not necessarily influences, but just awarenesses were. Um, and yeah, well, I could just leave it at that. But yeah, it's been very exciting to hear Sarah and Nina kind of working this back and forth process of there's no static moment in these works. One is feeding the other. The writing is feeding the other, the performance or the other practices, which feels like a very generative process to me. I don't know what word we would use for that. uh, in place of ekphrasis, maybe just multidisciplinary practice. But yeah, as far as feeding the earth, I mean, we've all, I think, spontaneously without planning, we've all have this through line of caring for the earth, responding to environmental crises. And I don't know if that conceptually relates to interdisciplinary work more than to other work, but it is an interesting through line in this panel.
So I would like to see what other guests, participants, people present here are feeling enlivened by or curious about or wanting to share with us. Let's open it up a little bit. It doesn't have to be, you know, asking the panelists a question. We can all be panelist guests here. What's on your mind?
Or maybe what just were people hoping or expecting or wanting to hear about? Why did you decide to tune in?
That's a good one too.
I know. I just because I know I know the people. I just want to bring you in as co-panelists. Like I'm like you both can speak to this topic as well. You know, I had to cut out things as I was trying to prepare. How do we talk about this? Because I agree. I'm like, am I even doing ekphrasis? Like, what do I think about this, right? Like, if I think about an ekphrastic poem, I still go back to that, what about suffering, they were never wrong, the old master, you know, the Bruegel painting, which I do love. Like, I love teaching that, and I think it's fabulous and fun. Yeah, I like memorizing poems, right? But yeah, I had to take some things out, and it's like part of the learning and the love process of just working between different forms. You know, I was really lucky to get to work with Angela Lopez as a dramaturg once upon a time for an amazing project called Glitch Lab. And Noah is engaged in his own like poetry and visual art collaboration right now, possibly in audio, and forming those spaces of collaboration for other people, like in the silos here in Buffalo. So and then I see a lady stuck up, okay. So I'll just shout out all those people and say that I know there's so many people working like transdisciplinarily, or just with an interest in kind of giving homage, maybe could be another way of talking about it. Because for me, I do think that's a large part of it is I'm like, okay, I can't really write reviews. I can't write a straight review so well, or I try, but you know, that's not really my strong suit. Try to write an essay and it's a poem, right? So like, can I do that, right? Can I be like, here's some amazing work that I would, you know, is influential to me, and like, can I shine some more light on it, or invite other people to think about it and maybe talk to me about it later, right? Okay.
Angela, I saw you go unmute for a minute.
Yeah, my fingers got in the way for a second. I think I've worked with Nina a lot, and a lot of what Nina does reminded me of my concerns and my desire to work with dramaturgy. And I thought that her approach to seeing how, especially the way that she sees the page for me, it's, to me, the page is the stage, and this sort of it's speculative embodiment, you know, on the page. And it helped me to find the language of what I was trying to get at without being too academic sometimes, because I tend to intellectualize. And so in working with her, I thought I was better able to access, something that was treating um, the language of what I was confronting, because we were talking about glitch and the cyber body and the techno body, and how to bring that back and inhabit, and code switching, and how to inhabit that with language. So, yeah, I think when I look, I didn't know what the word ekphrasis was. And I think there's that sort of that synthesizing or that happens with new media or intermedia work. And I think being exposed to how Nina put synthesized what we were doing in rehearsal and in practice with what she was doing, and when she was like seeing the final presentation of her project, really is amazing as a dancer to experience something that is experiencing the work, but not in the traditional sort of review setting, because there's something that's too cold about that sometimes.
Angela, I'm curious. Let's see. I hear you, Noah. Thank you for sharing that. I'm curious, when you say that you wanted to get out of your academic side, in practice, what does that look like? You know, what are you going to, and how maybe through Nina's help, I'm not really sure, but how do you get out of your academic side? I wonder if you'd be willing to.
I think you already mentioned it a little bit, like not being like in that not being afraid to be new or bad at something. That's my immediate response when I'm working with new media in particular. Like I'm learning how to code right now. I have no idea what I'm doing. It's so messy. And I know that the way that it might be perceived is like, oh, this person's a newbie at it, but there's a lot of surrender in that. And I think sometimes when there's so much control sometimes in academia, and then in the newness of things there's so much surrender, and I think that helps me access the chance removes the ego a lot. So yeah, being able to play in that way, and not knowing what's going to happen. um yeah, it helps.
So that permission.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and I know that had come up like in our discussions too, kind of early, right? About like, what do we do when we're working and we don't feel like an expert or whatever, which is all the time for me. So I mean, that's just normal. But like, yeah, how that's freeing if you can give yourself that permission. So I really appreciated that reminder of like, yeah, showing your hand. I think you called it, right? Like letting the imperfections show. Like I know I wish I could learn more video art, but I also don't have that patience necessarily or perfectionism for a lot of visual art. Like I just that's not my interest. I called it slop art as a kid, right? Because we're like, we just do it. It's important. I say it's all great, but, um, yeah, it's not the book arts where it's like you gotta be with your crisp fold. Sorry, mine has a showing.
Yeah, I find that something I have to continually recultivate is the willingness to be not in control of the process and not entirely confident. But when you can get there and like sustain that, that's the most exciting, I think.
And I think kind of just being generous and offering like what the people who are influencing you are like how that feeds into like the creation of the novel, right? Or the fiction, like that also feels that way to me too, of like, let me show you where some of my thinking and brain is or my body. Yeah. And then I see there's in the chat.
Yeah, so we have a question from maybe Ken. Sorry, blah, blah, blah. How do you decide which mediums you're pulling from or what you'll be able to mesh with your writing? It seems like you all pulled from fairly different ones to arrive at Ekphrasis. Um, Anybody have a ready thought about that?
I mean, I guess for me, it's fairly straightforward because I have a visual art practice and it's something I've studied a lot. Not officially, I'm not like an art historian, but as I say, I hadn't really thought in these terms before about my novel before I prepared for this panel, but when I started thinking about it, it wasn't hard to come up with references, although the first two seemed kind of self-explanatory to me. And then when I was thinking about Yoko Ono, I was like, do I really think that's relevant? And then the more I looked into it, I'm like, actually, yeah, the pieces I pulled out, she's doing the same thing, talking about a domestic space and how do you fit your psyche into it or fit it into your psyche. So all of which to say for me it was I could probably, if I were asked, I could probably also come up with a list of films or pieces of music that I wanted to relate to this work, but my first impulse was visual art because the character is a visual artist, which is because I think about what it's like to be a visual artist. So yeah, I guess my answer isn't so very surprising.
It's such a good question. I have a million different ways that I think about it. I think one of the things that I've been trying to understand a lot lately is the dance between chance and intentionality. Um, and I'm trying to understand my own, really not but my dance within chance and intentionality. It seems like there's some, well, first of all, I have had a smattering of hands-on experiences in a lot of different art forms. Not that I'm not about being good, but I've, taken classes or had experiences or tried stuff in a lot of different art forms. So they feel sort of like in the room, and then I think it's really project specific what gets triggered with. So if I think about the two books with Valerie, which then have kind of kept going, I'm now in talks about a film based on a Stella Meaning Star that I showed you cut-ups from. How did I get so freaking involved in dance? I'm not a professional dancer. I do, though, have a long and somewhat fraught relationship to dance and a great love of dance. And in fact, when I was in graduate school for creative writing with a focus on poetry, you had to have sort of like a minor. And I created a minor called the Poetry of the Body, basically because it was an excuse to take a whole lot of dance and movement and yoga classes. And so I do have this, and that's actually where I did have a little taste of those, of Rayner and Forti and their amazing colleagues and that world through that period, but it wasn't something that was conscious. But then when Val was like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do, Sarah? Figure out what we're going to do. And I just, it was just, there was this electricity toward this chapbook and the energy of the dialogue. That was as much part of it as anything else. Like, okay, let's trade lines and make sonnets together. Oh, what are we going to do? Okay, let's lift some lines from these people and let's not really say which lines those are. And so there was this excitement of collaboration. There was this fierceness about the the fact that we know about the dudes and not about the people that they inspired and who have, why is that? A lot of people have heard of them, a lot of people haven't. And so so there was this coalescing of impulses to dive in, and then this kind of just love affair toward dance, like how far can I take this? How much do I get to go into the world of dance, even though I didn't grow up being like with this rigorous dance training? What can I do? And this constant question of what serves the art? What will this body do? Where's collaboration and honoring other people's capacity? And that is a constant spiral. All those questions are a constant spiral.
Yeah, I relate to the spiral feeling. And I think too, maybe part of the interest is like, yeah, that's where I don't feel the mastery or whatever. So like I'm immersing myself in it. And then those are things I'm thinking about writing or processing in a different way. I know like dance, yeah, just amazing, right? Amazing. It makes you want to move and feel it. But I started aerial dance in grad school, and I know that when I was like doing that, I had to find ways to remember the choreography that the teachers were teaching us. And so part of it was like writing poems through that. And then I was thinking about like the 4D aspect on the page. And so that became like kind of an early, why am I writing about dance? Well, how do I justify that I'm doing this when I should just be only writing whatever is in my genre? Yeah, I don't know, just that kind of has stayed with me in terms of thinking about the space. And reading like dance critics at the time, I was reading like, was it Joan Akinsella? I think a teacher had pointed me to, and like, what beautiful writing, like incredible. Oh, I enjoyed it a lot. But yeah, it's definitely approaching from a different angle. And then I think like just what do we choose to take in, right? Because there's only so much we can do as humans with our multifaceted lives and demands on ourselves, especially now as a parent. But like, if I'm going to drive all the way to Toronto from Buffalo, what is it that interests me to go see, and like what is the through line there, right? And like so part of it is maybe also this like growing up German Catholic, right, and Panamanian also, but like that thing of needing to justify what I'm doing, coming from a farm worker dad, right? Like I need to be like, how can I be engaged at all with art? Like if I don't have something to show for it, right? Or like some reason. So if I'm writing, that's part of it. I get to be like, yes, I'm splurging to see this show far away or local, but it's still time in which I'm not, harvesting corn or something. I don't know.
Thank you, Ken. I see your reminder. Any other questions or comments that people want to presence before we wrap? It's called wait time in the education biz. Waiting. Well, I feel like we could very happily wrap up there, and people on the ground can go get some food. So this has been so wonderful. Nina and Mary, we've been emailing so much for months, but to actually get a chance to sit and see what the talks that you generated has just been so enriching for me. So I just want to thank you. And again, thanks to our lovely guest slash fellow panelists, and thanks to Ken. That's it. Ken, do you want to say anything or do anything?
Yes, I've still got a little bit of interference. I'm sorry, but thank you guys. This was really interesting panel.
Awesome. And I've put our Instagram handles and websites in the chat. So if you want to just take a second before we end this and copy paste those for your own use, please feel free. And yeah, I'm sure we'd all love to continue the dialogue with you in other spaces and places. So thanks again, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, LCLC. Thank you, Nina and Sarah.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.